logos is having reason and logic to persuade, so it's more like facts. So
It's not a language. It is a language. That's what I think. Because they communicate with each other.
But they don't speak.
So no matter that's the language. If you say that characteristic in a language, you can have words.
Citizens didn't agree with how the presidents viewed the war, how they were so easy to jump into war when all of them didn't want to get drafted into the war. They just wanted
Medicine commercial. That could work.
Fast to the world. Animal language, some of the characteristics that you said. It's sound. So
our government would rather spend money on like guns and bullets than actually solve problems back at home.
So more like
Let's also give it reasons why you shouldn't buy it, because like it have these side effects, and reasons why you should buy it.
Because they don't talk, but they communicate by doing signs. So they don't need to speak to communicate to others.
The first president to lose a war, right? So with Nixon's pride, he's not afraid to spend every cent we have to win this war.
In January of 2011, a national group of researchers, educators, and policy experts gathered at Stanford University to synthesize existing research and to build the field's capacity to serve English language learners. They talked about the changes necessary for students to engage in learning, actively talking and listening, and lifting the language as called for in the Common Core. This effort was named Understanding Language. They wrote papers synthesizing the research, analyzed policies, and discussed how the papers could be disseminated to policymakers and practitioners. Listen to some of the authors describing their work.
For the layperson, it almost is like English language learning. Yeah, it makes sense. They're learning English. Well, they're not just learning English. They're learning lots of concepts in different subject matters. And so by calling them English language learners, we're narrowing the challenges that they're struggling with. All of those language tools that we have that cut across disciplines have to also be embedded in the academic language development, and that it should happen as an integrated part of any instructional program and not separate. So ideas are ideas, and you can get those ideas in any language. You just have to learn also how to communicate those ideas. So that's a powerful thing for folks to remember, that the kids are not a blank slate. They've already come with quite a bit.
The main point is that we require a very different view of language. Language typically has been treated as form when teaching students, and so there's a lot of emphasis on, for example, the production of grammatical sentences. Or language is treated as function, so students learn how to, for example, compare, how to contrast. But in that case, still, the understanding of language is limited to that function, but doesn't look at language in its social context. So we propose that language be looked as action. And action, of course, encompasses both form and function, but it looks more at the general context in which communication takes place. One of the biggest implications is that teachers need to develop a new awareness of language. And once again, this is not going to come easily and in a short time. I would like readers to begin thinking about how they use language in their lives and how language is always embodied in the context, but also how we do not just talk, but we move our hands, we smile or we frown, we touch people. Language is action, and it's impossible to separate words, sentences from what we're doing, from the context with whom we are doing it. What kinds of opportunities do teachers need to be provided so as to develop that expertise, to meet the learner where the learner is, but to run into the future as soon as possible in deep and rigorous ways? That is something that cannot just happen as a result of a workshop.
When I think about the question, what do English learners need in mathematics classrooms? I think that first they need teachers who are prepared to teach math for understanding. And the Common Core standards are a wonderful way to focus on teaching math for understanding. The second thing that English learners need is for administrators and teachers to know that English learners can participate in mathematical discussions. The third thing I would want administrators and teachers to know is that children, as they're participating in mathematical discussions, may use imperfect language or language that's from their everyday lives and experiences, and they're not going to sound like mathematicians. They may not use formal language. On the other hand, it's the role of teachers to help children connect their ways of talking that are more everyday and to transform those into more academic ways of talking. Another point in the paper that I presented here is that we in math education are very clear that both for English learners and for students who are native English speakers, the instruction needs to focus on mathematical practices, not on vocabulary, single words or single sentences. What students need to be doing is participating in mathematical practices such as abstracting, generalizing, and of course our favorites, which are conjecturing and using mathematical reasoning. Focusing on mathematical practices means that instruction will also be focusing on students' conceptual understanding. Now, it's tough to see and know when students are actually showing you that they understand something. You can't just say, did you understand? And then have them tell you, yes, I understood. So what the Common Core standards, I believe, help teachers to do is to ask students for evidence that they have conceptual understanding or that they understand. And this evidence is usually reasoning, if they can explain why something is the case. Why does multiplying two fractions that are positive and smaller than 1 make the result smaller? They can also use multiple representations.
The next generation science standards offer very rich and meaningful opportunities for science learning, but that also explicitly require attention to language skills. Several practices that are very much the essence of science, that is very language intensive, but they are very related to one another, but they also are related to Common Core state standards in ELL and math. Those 4 practices include constructing models, constructing explanations, giving argumentation based on evidence, and then validating and communicating information.
In every one of the 4 areas of the standards are set up in the traditional sort of language skills. Well, there's a section on reading, which focuses on engaging in complex texts. There's a section on writing, which focuses on using and analyzing ideas and making arguments. There's a section on speaking and listening, which emphasizes collaborative work and discussion of ideas, articulation of students' own ideas, and presentation of those ideas to various audiences. And then finally, a section on language, which we interpret as pertaining to the linguistic resources that students need to use and develop to do all of the things in the other standards.
One of the points that Aida and I make is that quality instruction needs to be contingent. And by that, we mean that teachers need to be responding to who the students are, what they bring to the school context with them, and also to be able to be adaptive and nimble in their teaching in response to the particular language and content needs that children are manifesting in real time. So as they're learning, teachers need to be conscious of what they're learning, how their learning is evolving, so they can adapt instruction, they can be responsive and make sure that they're meeting the needs of the wide range of learners they will have in their classrooms. One of the practice implications in our paper is that teachers need to get good at contingent assessment. They need to be able to embed assessment in the ongoing learning, so it's occurring during the course of instruction, not at the end of a sequence of instruction. And in that way, they're able to be responsive to students.
Key to the work is that practitioners understand that the Common Core has significant content demands, but also significant language demands. And those are then compounded by the demands of English language development. So that's critical for our community to understand.
One of the main points that Kenji and I both make in looking at policy is that we have to be at the table. We have to not forget that this is about language, rich language in the classroom, and that really the policy points are about how we go in and leverage policy to work for our kids in the classroom. When people look at this paper, I hope they'll walk away saying, I can have an impact on policy, and we need, as educators of English language learners, to be engaged in policy and understand broader policy so that we can use those hooks to improve instruction for English language learners. So much of the policy that we're putting out there today is put out under the guise of being responsive to communities and transparent so that people can take ownership for learning and be part of the accountability system. So it's incumbent on us to ensure that the parents of English language learners understand how they can use policy to enhance their children's opportunity to go to college and to learn language at its highest level.
The papers by these authors were further discussed in a conference of researchers and practitioners to draw out implications for instruction aligned to the Common Core and the Next Generation Science Standards, looking at the challenges and opportunities for English learners. The principles represent a blend of theory, research, and professional knowledge, and lay a framework for reform and future evidence gathering on student learning. The goal is to create a robust field of research that directly addresses the needs of local and state educators around practice and policy. The first principle is that instruction focuses on providing ELLs with opportunities to engage in discipline-specific practices which are designed to build conceptual understanding and language competence in tandem. Learning is a social process that requires teachers to intentionally design learning opportunities that integrate reading, writing, speaking, and listening with the practices of each discipline. The second principle is that instruction leverages the ELL's home language, cultural assets, and prior knowledge. ELL's home language and culture are regarded as assets and are used by the teacher in connecting prior knowledge to new knowledge and in making content meaningful and comprehensible. The third principle is that standards-aligned instruction for ELLs is rigorous, grade appropriate, and provides deliberate and appropriate scaffolds. Instruction that is rigorous and standards aligned reflects the key shifts in the Common Core and Next Generation Science Standards. Such shifts require that teachers provide students with opportunities to describe their reasoning, share explanations, make conjectures, justify conclusions, argue from evidence, and negotiate meaning from complex texts. Students with developing levels of English proficiency will require instruction that carefully supports their understanding and use of emerging language as they participate in these activities. The next principle is that instruction moves ELL learning forward by taking into account their English proficiency level and prior schooling experiences. English learners within a single classroom can be heterogeneous in terms of home language proficiency, proficiency in English, literacy levels in English and students' home language, previous experiences in schools, and time in the U.S. Teachers must be attentive to these differences and design instruction accordingly. The next principle stresses the importance of student agency and autonomy, recognizing that students are active learners. ELLs need to be equipped with the strategies necessary to comprehend and use language in a variety of academic settings. ELLs must learn to use a broad repertoire of strategies to construct meaning from academic talk and complex text, to participate in academic discussions, and to express themselves in writing across a variety of academic situations. Tasks must be designed to ultimately foster student independence. The final principle emphasizes the importance of teacher diagnostic tools and formative assessment practices, especially eliciting student language and gaining from this an understanding of the student's learning. Teachers must be able to assess their students' content knowledge, academic language competence, and participation in disciplinary practices. These assessment practices allow teachers to monitor students' learning so that they may adjust instruction accordingly, provide students with timely and useful feedback, and encourage students to reflect on their own thinking and learning. Congress passed the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in December 2015, which President Barack Obama signed into law. The new law represents a major shift in responsibility from the federal government to states and local districts in how student learning is measured and improved. ESSA is notable in how it raises the profile of English language proficiency standards by requiring its assessment as part of Title I accountability. The new law swings most decision-making back to states, including how struggling schools are identified and what actions are taken, including actions to improve services for English learners. Perhaps most importantly, it requires state agencies to work collaboratively with local agencies in creating better ways of identifying, monitoring, and better serving the needs of the growing population of the diverse group of students known as English learners. We educators need to seize the moment to create better local and state approaches to lifting the language of all students. It is a new day in education. The success of the nation depends on the success of every student, including English learners.